Hello there, and welcome to the live stream. Screen share here. So welcome to this live stream. Hello to those people online watching. I think we've got about 11 viewers at the moment. So as I said, if you clicked on this website yesterday, which is the New South Wales JOMO e-recruit site, you would have seen about 5 jobs listed yesterday. Now, if we click on it today, because we're in the second round of offers, 23rd of September, you'll see they're listed a total of 233 jobs. So traditionally, this is one of the opportunities for international medical graduates to apply for jobs if you need like a provisional registration job or a limited registration job. That sort of thing. Thank you, Fizza, for telling me you can hear now. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm using a new platform and just getting familiar with it. So I think these jobs went live about 9 o'clock this morning, and this is really like the catch-up round for New South Wales. And New South Wales is it's the biggest state by population there, and therefore the biggest state in terms of number of hospitals and health services here in Australia, and therefore the biggest state in terms of opportunities for working in medicine in Australia. Every year they have close to 50,000 applicants for about 6,000 or 7,000 various trainee doctor jobs that are available. And they've already had the first round that sort of kicked off in June, July. It's sort of this annual medical recruitment process goes on for almost half the year in most states and territories of Australia. New South Wales tends to be the last state that does all this stuff, so it's kind of the last opportunity. But what you see with all of the states is after they've got through their main round, which they're generally allocating positions to doctors who already have general registration here in Australia. Once they've got through that main round, they've got vacancies. People might have accepted offers and then another one and another falls out, that sort of thing. And so they start to re-advertise positions for the various jobs that they're trying to fill. And many of them will now be potentially open to someone who's, say, on a standard pathway route or competent authority route, or even people going through the specialist pathway. So what I did earlier is just have a little of a poke around in the system to see what's available. I'm just going to demonstrate a few things for you. But you guys might have some questions. You might have already had a look at the jobs board, maybe seen things that you were interested in, particular positions. So if you want to point out a position to me that you want to get my feedback on, we can do that as well. And if you have any particular questions about the process, and particularly around eligibility or selection criteria, that sort of thing, please post them in the chats below and we'll try and get to them. Before we get into that, I'll just point out, there's a video on the channel about applying for jobs online, and also we do have a blog post, so I'll skip up to the top here, called Doctor Jobs in Australia, How to Find Them, which takes you through some of the issues around how to identify jobs. And one of the key things is this thing about eligible for registration. These are the key magic words that you need to see in selection criteria. We'll demonstrate that today. So if you look at the jobs, so we've got 233. This is a typical jobs board. It's probably worth, if you're interested in jobs in Australia, trying to get into jobs, worth signing up for this, because you can do that typical thing of signing up for alerts and notifications about jobs that might be of interest to you. Of course, a lot of these jobs get aggregated to things like Seek. That's the big main overarching employment portal here in Australia. But you can see you can refine your search by location, health district. So New South Wales is broken into, I think, 16 health districts that cover all the state of New South Wales. You can also break them down to facilities. There's a long list, so these are essentially hospitals and other sites. Specialty, and then also training networks at the bottom there, employment status. That's it. But the one I think that's probably worth you using for a filter is this one, position title. Again, I've done videos around this, but for a lot of people, particularly those coming through the standard pathway, you're looking at jobs in the resident medical officer range. So you should definitely look at any of those jobs that have come up, and I'll show you a couple of them. It's also worth looking at senior resident medical officer jobs. So resident medical officer is postgraduate year 2. And senior resident medical officer is generally postgraduate year 3, maybe 4. Basically, it's kind of the last job that you can do before you become what's called a registrar, or also referred to as a trainee in New South Wales by position title. The other ones that, I mean, you can look at all of them. If though you are coming through that AMC Part 1, Part 2 standard pathway process, as I said, resident medical officer, senior resident medical officer, and possibly these unaccredited trainee jobs are worth looking at as well. Because these are the ones that are going to be at that level in terms of your seniority, in terms of eligibility to work in Australia, that they're going to be open to considering you. Some of these other titles, they can be a little bit confusing, but a senior registrar is an advanced training role. Basic trainee is kind of a junior training role. You've got advanced trainee up there. Provisional fellow is kind of basically finished your training, so that's very advanced. Provisional trainee is a special title in some colleges, so usually it's not open to international doctors. Career medical officers, like a I think it's like a staff officer in the UK, so that's someone who's outside of training. So again, they're probably not going to be opportunities for those coming through the standard pathway. However, for those through competent authority, often basic trainee jobs might now be open. You might be able to work in one of those. And anyone who's looking at short-term specialist training pathway, or is a specialist who's trying to come through the specialist pathway, particularly if you've got like partial comparability through that process, then advanced trainee, provisional fellow jobs are probably worth exploring, because they maybe provide the opportunity you need to work in Australia. So I might just pause there and see if there are any questions about that. Everyone's still hearing me fine? A little drink. So, question from Hardy: which position should you look for if you have AMC 1 only? Yeah, look. So let's get into that. Where I would recommend you start looking is at the resident medical officer jobs, and then the senior jobs. And you need to make sure that under the selection criteria, they're going to be able to take you on board. So obviously with the AMC Part 1, you may have had a wealth of experience somewhere else. Let's face it. But they're going to see you at their very junior level. Things to be aware of is, if you're applying for those jobs with your Part 1, and let's say someone else has got the Part 2, they're often going to be seen as a better candidate. Also, if you're competing against someone who might have permanent residency, that can also affect your whether you even get an interview, as well as things like your English language standard. I've done videos about this, and also written a blog post about trying to get a little bit above the minimum standard on, say, your IELTS or your PTE or OET. But yes, I'll show you a couple of jobs around that. So I think so here's one of the, so you remember there's 3 resident medical officer jobs advertised. Actually, only one of them would be open to someone with AMC Part 1. So here's one of them. Here's an example of one that you couldn't apply for. So this one's at Coffs Harbour. So for those of you not familiar with Australia, I'll just point out, so we've got Sydney here, and Coffs Harbour's up the coast. It's sort of almost about halfway to the Queensland border, really. Well, it's a nice part of the world. I'm in Newcastle. Coffs is a fair bit of a drive past that, about 3 hours or so. And so they've got a big hospital there. And so this job, is for a resident medical officer. I always recommend looking at the position purpose. You can also tell how senior it is based on the salary band, but this should give you a bit of an indication of what you'll be doing. So you see here, it's a little bit, it's not fairly specific really, but it does talk about being under the supervision of senior medical officers in a complex clinical environment, and then there's a whole lot of position requirements, but you can read through all this stuff, and hopefully you can see that. Do I need to maybe, I can do that with the screen if that helps people to read the PD a little bit. I've got the comments now going in the way there. So you can read through all this stuff, and you obviously need to read through all of it if you're going to apply for the job. But I recommend skipping down here to the very bottom where they've got the selection criteria. And actually also at the bottom you get the contact details for the job owner. So that's useful as well. So this is pretty standard. The first selection criteria, generally in New South Wales, in fact most places, talks about the qualification you require. So you can see here, MBBS or equivalent, MBBS or equivalent, so primary medical degree, currently registered with the Medical Board of Australia. So bam, that's it. You can't apply for that job because you have to be currently registered with the Medical Board of Australia. So don't waste your time, move on. So they're looking for someone who's already registered here in Australia. So let's look at the second one. I'm not going to show you the third one because it was similar to that, but this is the one. This one's at Lismore, which is even further up the coast. We need to go in a little bit. There you go. Kind of just south of the Queensland border, very close to Brisbane, really, and Byron Bay, which is a very popular part of Australia. I'm just going to kill that one off. So here we go, Lismore. Again, same salary band, resident medical officer, provision of medical care under supervision and guidance of senior medical staff. And then we skip down to the bottom, although I'll come back up to the top because I just noticed something there which is a bit inconsistent. So, selection criteria, MBBS or equivalent, currently registered or eligible for registration with the Medical Board of Australia. So that indicates that if you are, say, on your AMC Part 1, which makes you eligible to get registered with some support for one of these positions, that you could apply for this job. However, there are a few zingers here. Postgraduate Year 2 or above. Probably most people who've got the AMC Part 1 have done a year or more in medicine, so technically that wouldn't rule you out. The rest of it is something you need to convince them, basically, at interview. This is interesting, the valid unencumbered driver's license. I kind of wonder why that's a requirement. There are other ways of getting to work, but anyway, you need a valid driver's license to work at Lismore Hospital. You wouldn't be expected to be transporting patients around or anything like that. But I did notice at the top, actually, when I went through this again, I didn't. So I normally go to selection criteria, and that's the first part. They've said here a degree in medicine from a recognised institution and registered with the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, postgraduate Year 2 above. So I guess, well, that's a position requirement. So often what they say is you can't work in the job until you're registered. So it's possible they've written in there to say, well, to work in the job, you need your registration. However, for us to select you, you can be eligible for registration. And certainly it's the case that they don't have to, they can offer you the job, you can sign the contract, but you do have to demonstrate all your eligibility requirements. So it's well within the employer's right to withdraw the offer, in a sense, or not start you in employment if you haven't been able to get through the registration process, because that is a job requirement. But anyway, that would be a job that someone with AMC Part 1 could apply for. So it's worth checking that one out there, Hardy. Now, a question from Ahmed. What about training and unaccredited training positions for IMGs with AMC Part 1 and OET? So this will Generally, the trainee jobs are advertised as trainees where you're already into a college. So, generally speaking, um, you won't be eligible to apply for those. Unaccredited trainee positions, yes, there are cases where people with AMC Part 1 get an unaccredited trainee position. It really doesn't matter whether you've got the IELTS, the PTE, or the OET, and I forget the other one. Uh, Often, from a recruiter's perspective, is not so much that you've got one of those. When we're looking at your CVs, what we're looking at is what's your actual score, because that's a bit of a fairly rudimentary but fairly hard-edged indication of your English language skills. So, as I say, if we use the example of IELTS, which I see the most, if someone comes through with a CV that says my IELTS is 7 overall, I think, well, okay, that's a lot of people. But if someone comes through with an IELTS of 8 overall, that kind of gets my attention, because it's an indicator of higher level of communication skills. And they have to draw the line somewhere, but often you find that those who demonstrate just the the required English language proficiency do struggle communicating in the Australian hospital system. So employers will look for a little bit better than that. But in terms of, AMC Part 1, you can apply for some of these other jobs. So we might look at, there's a few SRMO jobs that I've found, and then we'll look at unaccredited trainees and go there. So here's an SRMO job, Senior Resident Medical Officer job. And this is based in Wollongong in emergency medicine. And emergency medicine, emergency medicine as well as psychiatry, probably two big areas to look, because essentially there's a high demand for people to work in those areas. There's less Australian trainees going into those areas, and so they're kind of two fruitful places to look for jobs for IMGs. Anything critical care as well, because emergency medicine kind of fits within critical care as a kind of overarching stream here in Australia as well. So they're kind of two high yield areas to look as well. So this is emergency medicine in the Prince of Wales network, which includes Wollongong and Sutherland, etc. So that's in Sydney, although you might have to map of Australia, maybe rotate down here from Sydney. Let me just find my spot. I'm going to just get rid of those other two that I had up. Again, we just skip down the bottom, see what they say about registration. That's the most fruitful thing. So here we go, MBBS or equivalent, currently registered or eligible for registration with the Medical Board of Australia. So that again would be one that you might be able to apply for. However, they're probably looking in this case for a little bit more experience and possibly some, as I say, significant experience in an Australian emergency department or equivalent. Now, what does that mean? I'm reading between the lines there that they're looking for someone who's worked in emergency in somewhere like the UK or the US or Canada, one of the competent authority countries. So this might be one, particularly if you're a competent authority doctor, so someone who's done their medical degree in the UK, Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Canada, US, or gone through the process for Canada equivalency in Canada, US, UK, you may be able to apply for this. They're looking for people who are also keen to train, which is FACEM is Fellowship of the Australasian College of Emergency Medicine. This would depend on your experience in emergency. So you would have to make a good case that you've got a reasonable experience in emergency medicine. So, Ahmed, you said you already had a couple of interviews for training positions. What sort of positions did you apply for, and have you heard back yet? Well, I'm waiting for that answer. This is another SRMO job. This is Hunter New England, Tamworth-based hospital. Again, emergency medicine. Skip down the bottom. again, another one where currently registered or eligible for registration with the medical board. Again, they want two full-time equivalent postgraduate years experience working in an acute hospital. I'm not a big fan of this sort of setting experience as a criteria, by the way, but this is kind of another rudimentary way of sort of sorting out whether people have the kind of skills and knowledge that they feel are relevant to the job. I would sort of turn that into something like demonstrates a higher level of clinical knowledge and ability in emergency medicine or something like that. But anyway, you need 2 years working in a hospital. So emergency and ICU, but unfortunately no feedback. So assuming you didn't get an offer, yeah, look, feedback is interesting. You generally don't get much feedback out of this, particularly the annual medical recruitment interview process. The reason being is there's just so many interviews going on, and the panels are often seeing 20 or 30 people at a time. That to give you good feedback is really hard because it's hard to actually remember exactly what you said, and they've got notes and they can sometimes give you some feedback back on based on that, but it's not particularly specific and targeted. My personal tip and recommendation in terms of getting some feedback about your interview performance is, other than booking a session with a coach like myself, is to if you do get a final question in the interview, is to actually use it as an opportunity to ask for some specific feedback and be ruthless and say, look, is there anything that you can tell me, particularly, what was my worst question, or, which one could I have improved the most? That's probably your best way of getting some feedback in terms of your interview performance or where you particularly stand as a candidate. I don't understand the question about adaptive score. Hardy, what do you mean by does your adaptive score affect your application? Maybe if you can sort of clarify that a bit, I can come back to you. Anyway, so that one's also one that you could apply for, but as I said, you do need some extra experience. That was an SRMO, wasn't it? So a bunch of SRMO jobs up there, and not all of them were for were eligible. So let's have a look at this surgical one. Suspect that won't. Yep, so that's in the New South Wales Surgical Skills Training Network. Pretty sure that won't accept an IMG applicant. Yeah, MBBS or equivalent currently registered. I didn't. There are probably some psychiatry ones there. They would probably again be open to an IMG applicant. Let's move to unaccredited trainees. So here's an example of an unaccredited trainee position, again in the Hunter New England district. So that's where I'm located. If we look up here, that it starts around Newcastle, goes all the way up to the Queensland border and takes in Tamworth and Armidale. So that last one we looked at was in Tamworth. This is Armidale. And oops, this one. So this is an emergency medicine again. You kind of ask what's the difference between this one and this one to some extent, particularly when you go down the bottom and again see that MBBS or equivalent, currently registered or eligible for registration. And again, they want 2 full-time equivalent postgraduate years experience working in an acute hospital. Not surprised these job descriptions are similar because they're from the same health service. So the answer from Hardy was, in the AMC1 score sheet, you receive a score on the MCQ exam. Does it matter in the selection criteria? No, I don't think your AMC score really matters much at all. It's like whether you have a medical degree or not. We don't really look at your academic performance in particularly when we're looking at recruiting people for sort of resident jobs. It's whether you've got the required basic qualifications. Do you have a medical degree in Australia, or do you have the AMC1 or AMC certificate complete, which makes you eligible in terms of your registration requirements. There are far more important things than your score on the AMC, or in fact whether you got honours or distinction in your primary medical degree in Australia, and they are around how you relate with patients. Are you safe? Do you display common sense? Can you work well within teams, etc.? So really, you're like in most cases, your degree gets you into the entry level job, and then what you do post that is in terms of your work career is far more important. So, if you got a particularly high score on your AMC, yeah, put it down on your CV and resume. It doesn't hurt to do that. But if you passed it, you passed it. No one's going to ask you what it is, generally speaking. So basically, in summary, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the actual score on your AMC Part 1 is, so long as you passed it, obviously. Here's another unaccredited trainee from Southeast Sydney Local Health District, this time in general medicine. General medicine often also has some jobs that are open. Again, they just, the hospitals in New South Wales just kind of couldn't run if they didn't have enough what's called basic physician trainees or equivalent medical registrars to look after all the chronic comorbid cases that occur and people that need those sort of general medical services in hospitals. So again, they often don't fill up all of their jobs with trainees, and sometimes they're limited in terms of how many trainee jobs they can have as well. Oh, hi Sharia, how you doing? Sorry the sound's not clear. I think everyone else is getting it all right. I can try and adjust it a little bit. Let me know if it improves. You're not getting an echo. I had an echo on OBS once, and it took me half the live stream to figure out what was going on. It was one button I forgot to tick. So anyway, let's again skip down. Now, here it is though. This one, MBS, BS or equivalent currently registered. So this one is an example of a job that you would not be able to apply for. But I can't remember how many there were, but I think there was a bunch of unaccredited trainee jobs here. I've got to go back one more. Let's go. Let's search all again. How's your AMC courses going there, Sharia? Sharia points quite a few people my way, and I'm very thankful for that. And I do recommend his academy if you're needing some help with your AMC preparation. So unaccredited trainees, 48. So there's bound to be a bunch more jobs. I haven't looked at all these 233 positions. I certainly didn't look at all 48 of those. But so there's probably going to be one in general medicine that will take someone. But here's another one in emergency medicine at Liverpool in Sydney. Again, eligible for registration. Interestingly, though, I wonder how they deal with this. So completion of at least 2 postgraduate years, I can get that. Most of you can probably demonstrate that. Working towards membership of ASIM. Well, to do that, you have to be a trainee with ASIM, and then they've also got a minimum of 6 months experience in the Australian Emergency Department, which they probably won't count observerships for, by the way. So that may make it a little bit more difficult for international doctors to apply for. And I think that's the last one that I spotted. Not every... it's not just New South Wales that has jobs at these times. So, for example, WA Health, here's a job for a similar thing, registrar training in emergency medicine. Again, eligible for registration with the Medical Board of Australia. So it's pretty much worth checking out all of the jobs boards for all the states and territories at this point in time to see what's going. And as I say, looking for these magic words of eligible for registration. But you then need to kind of dig a bit deeper and see whether there's like certain years of experience or types of experience they're looking for. as well as sometimes they even specifically mention the difference between competent authority and standard pathway countries, which again I object to, but they sometimes do that. So have a look at all the other jobs boards too. If anyone spotted one, then they want me to talk them through. I'm happy to do that. Tasneem, a question. With AMC1 and PTE and 5 years of experience overseas, what are the chances of getting a job, and what are the positions can I apply for? So I'm presuming your experience is recently current. Again, I find with these questions, I know you've only got so much you can put on the chat, but without being able to go through your career more specifically and spend time looking through it, it's hard to give you exact advice. But with 5 years of experience, again, it might depend which country as well. You can apply for a resident medical officer or unaccredited trainee or a senior resident medical officer type of job. If you've been doing formal training somewhere, so for example, you're a UK trainee working in a particular college, then often you can sort of transfer to, say, an unaccredited trainee role that's equivalent here in Australia through the competent authority pathway. So hopefully that answers that question for you. We might just, I don't know if there's any of you tackling the short-term specialist training pathway or the specialist pathway online, but we can have a quick look at some of these advanced trainee jobs as well, just to see whether any of those are open. Sorry, we're just waiting for the system to update. So why don't we look at, should we go provisional fellow advanced trainee? Let's go advanced trainee. Hello Deepti, paediatrician with 10 years of experience in India. You have a PR for New South Wales. You mean you have permanent residency? Because if you've got permanent residency, it's for all of Australia, not just New South Wales. And you got AMC 1 and AMC 2. So, what are your options? Well, again, it's difficult to say with that amount of information, but it would seem to me that if you've become a paediatrician in India, you may well also be eligible for the specialist pathway, and a number of Indian doctors have gone through that. Often they get from the college, they get an outcome which says partially comparable, and I find particularly with those doing the programs through the RACP, that's the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, which covers adult and paediatric medicine and a bunch of other things, they often end up in one of these advanced trainee type or provisional fellow roles for a couple of years, doing their requirements towards specialist pathway before then becoming registered as a specialist. So you've got permanent residency. So a couple of things about that. With the AMC Part 1 and Part 2 and permanent residency, you've obviously got your AMC certificate, you've got your residency. That means by law that if you're eligible for a job, you should be given that above someone who's on a visa. So that makes it you more eligible for a number of these jobs that I've actually gone through. And you could certainly apply for a resident job, an SRMO job, unaccredited trainee job. I didn't look to see, and I didn't notice too many paediatric type jobs. But the other thing I would recommend you doing, and maybe you want to contact me through my website, advancedmed.com.au, and also have a look around there, is thinking about whether you should actually just apply for specialist pathway. How long was your MD for? And what did you do the DNB? These things kind of matter when the colleges assess you. So the reason I say maybe look at specialist pathway is if you come back through standard pathway, the AMC process, you're basically starting from scratch again. And then if you're wanting to specialise, you're essentially having to go back through specialty training. So if you've got a chance of being recognised as a paediatrician here in Australia, why wouldn't you do that, it's going to cut out a number of years if that's actually an option open to you. These are all the advanced trainee jobs. Pathology, nuclear medicine, neonatal and perinatal. Let's have a look at that, see what it's got listed there. Sydney Children's Hospital Network. You never know. Yep, here we go. So this would be one, let's say somebody who has been partially approved by the Royal Australasian College of Physicians for specialist assessment in paediatrics to work in a supervised capacity to demonstrate their ability to work as a paediatrician here. In fact, this almost looks like it's kind of being geared that way because it talks about 5 years postgraduate clinical experience, including in paediatrics and neonatology, recent competency in deteriorating patients, a few other things in terms of critical care experience. So you need to have those. But again, the reason they're advertising these again is they couldn't get enough Australian doctors, if you like, or doctors with general registration the first time round. So they're often opening it up to other opportunities. So you did DNB for 3 years, followed by a senior residency. Don't quite get that because DNB is not. Do you mean you did an MD for 3 years and then the DNB? Anyway, it sounds like you probably would be from what you said there. I would 3 years MD. Okay, yeah. So I think you probably stand a reasonable good chance of going through the specialist assessment pathway, and I'd strongly recommend that. So you should get in contact with me, and we can do a coaching session and go through it in a bit more detail and talk about your prospects. But there's a bit of a. I mean, it's true that Indian specialist doctors don't do as well as a number of other countries in terms of the specialist pathway, but still most of them do get a comparability. And College of Physicians tends to be a little bit more generous than others based on the statistics as well. Now, a couple other questions. Tasneem, might just actually, we've spent too long here on this. Yeah, we're going to have a big headshot of me. So, Tasneem, do CPD points matter on the CV, and how many are required to make it an impactful CV? So CPD points don't matter. CPD does. CPD points really matter more to a college in terms of them counting up whether you've done enough continuing professional development. I've actually never seen anyone I've not seen too many people put the number of CPD points on their CV. I don't think that's as important as the fact that you have done some CPD, and it's really about your currency of CPD as well. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to have some continuing professional development listed on their resume, and it's really about it being recent and thinking through everything you've done and making sure you've listed it. So a number of doctors kind of do CPD through, say, the College of General Practitioners, or ACRM, which is often a good idea because they provide some broad CPD, but it's more about having enough. I think particularly stuff that you've done in the last 3 years, because the normal cycle of CPD for most colleges is 3 years. Things that have been done more distantly, less relevant. You don't have to go overboard as long as it's kind of showing that you've been maintaining your professional development recently through both working and doing further study or learning, then that's okay. So it could be a matter of 3 or 4 things that you list down, but as long as it's current. I'm hoping I'm getting to every question. Juliana, should I consider all the RMO positions of the first round unsuccessful? If you haven't heard back by now, then I would say yes, because if they're re-advertising, then that's because they haven't got enough people. It would depend. Sometimes they like to put you on what's called an eligibility list, and they should tell you, hopefully tell you if you're on that list. But sometimes they don't even do that. I did write about how it's quite notorious in the basic physician training network program sometimes for people to be given an email like March the following year when they're just clearing out the system to tell people they haven't been eligible. Now, there's a reason why they do that, because often they want to just hang on to people just in case they need to offer someone else a job because someone else drops out. And some of the problems is the system has kind of got certain technical capabilities, etc. So let's not just slot the blame at the JMO manager per se, but yes, so I would basically say if you haven't heard, you probably haven't been given the position, but it's worth just flicking them an email just to inquire. JMO Recruit does have a contact, I think, as well, where you can ask people questions in terms of where you might be up to in the system. Then question from Tasneem: how many years gap in medical practice would not count as recency of practice? So the official line from the Medical Board of Australia is 3 years. You need to understand what that's about, though. They don't say if you haven't worked in 3 years, that's it. And this recency of practice thing is also relevant to people like me as well. So it's about everyone being recent in their practice. And the consequence is if you haven't had enough practice in the last few years, they generally want to see a level of supervision and support to initially to get you back into practice. So just because you've been out for a while doesn't mean someone can't give you the job. It's just they need to demonstrate that it'll be in a supervised way. With a lot of these resident jobs, they are very highly supervised. They're usually under what's called level 1 or direct supervision. So it's possible to give someone a go. The issue, though, then it's the next point of the problem is around the employer's perspective. And generally, if the employers have got quite a few people to select from, which they generally do, then they are going to look through all the sort of basic stuff. And if they see that you haven't worked in a number of years, then they're probably going to say that you're a bit rusty. And if they've got 10 other people who've recently been working, they're going to look at them and probably not even offer you an interview, unfortunately. So my general recommendation for anyone who's not worked in medicine for, say, a couple of years, 2 years is probably okay, but if it's getting on past 2 years, certainly into 3 years, you really do need to think about whether you can go back to the country that you got your degree in or somewhere else that you can be registered and do 3 months or 2 months or something like that worth of clinical work just to refresh your recency of practice. There's a number of doctors I know in Australia who, as part of getting into the system, would regularly go back once a year to their country and do, say, 4 weeks just to keep it topped up. And that's okay. I understand in some circumstances it's really hard to do that, but you've got to see it from you've got to understand it from the employer's point of view. As I said, if they see that it's been 5-6 years since you've worked, and they've got others who've worked last year or this year, then they're going to go for the more recent clinician generally. Just see if there's any more questions then. Keep them coming if you need. How's the sound there, Shari? I just turned the volume up, so that might have fixed it. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any more questions on the chat at this point in time. So, as I say, check out the site, check out the other boards, check out the post that I wrote about looking for these jobs. Also, while you're on Advanced Med, check us out. We've got a bunch of services. including things like helping you with actually writing a decent CV, or really it's a resume here in Australia. And I often do find that one of the things when people ask me for advice in terms of getting things sorted out and why they're not getting an interview, it's often because unfortunately the CV or resume that you've written for yourself, or perhaps someone else who actually should know better has written for you, is really not appealing to the employer. So check that out. If you're feeling a bit rusty with things like your interview performance, I do coaching around that. And so you can check out those services here. If you just want to have an initial discussion about your prospects through any pathway, I really recommend this initial coaching session that I do. It's basically the most discounted session available, and for $165 I'll sit down with you, go through your resume, show you a whole lot of things on the web in terms of the process, and you'll be a lot more clearer in your mind about what the next steps are, whether that's standard pathway, competent authority, specialist pathway, or maybe feel that it's the effort required and the expense is possibly not worth it. And I think that's important to get advice up front, because people can spend a lot of time and effort and money investing in this process and get really frustrated. So it's important to get good advice up front before embarking on becoming a doctor in Australia as well. So Frizzy, so I'm just gonna, here's my thing. So question from Fizzer, does eligibility criteria answers really matter in shortlisting? Should they be well thought out or impressive? Very good question. Look, I think the most important thing is what your resume looks like, because that's what most employers are looking at when you apply. With a lot of these systems, like the New South Wales system, you actually can't you can't send in a cover letter addressing the criteria. They say don't do that. What happens is you go in, you fill in your basic details for the job, you upload your resume, and then they will ask you to answer the selection criteria in a text box, basically. I think the important thing is to try and link what's already in your resume back to those answers. Those answers should provide some good evidence for each criteria as to why you demonstrate those selection. So yes, I think your answers should be well thought out. But people ask me all the time, "Oh, can you help me write some selection criteria?" And I generally say, "No, I'm not going to do that. I want to review your resume and make sure that that's right first, because I can't help you write good selection criteria until I know your career." And I think you need to know your career to be able to answer those selection criteria as well. Sometimes I think people think that I've got a bunch of, stock answers for selection criteria that will work. Well, they don't. Just having value statements or hypothetical responses is not going to address those criteria. Most of those criteria are looking for evidence, examples that you can supply. And it's worth doing that, because when you get to the job interview, hopefully you get there, you will have some of the answers that you need for the interviews as well. So yes, short answer, how you answer the eligibility criteria in the portal is important, but I would definitely start with reviewing your resume. And as I said, I help people with that, but you can also look at videos that I've done online about that to get some inspiration about what to do. Red Knight, hello. I'm going to finish my MD in psychiatry in 2021. Should I apply straight after I graduate, or should I work a few years in India before applying? A good question. Look, I would tend to recommend, particularly, I think for everyone, what the colleges are partly what they're looking for when they're assessing you is at what level as a specialist in your own country do you perform, and therefore will you perform here in Australia? The standard is how close you are to be able to work as a specialist in your own in that particular specialty in Australia. So a lot of it's about what training you've done and how you've been assessed, but also there's this performance issue in terms of being able to demonstrate your performance. So if you are able to talk about how you worked as a consultant for a couple of years and what you've been doing, that does matter. And I think that's the same for most countries approaching specialist pathway assessment. So I generally say, yes, work for a few years first before applying. You'll generally get a more favourable outcome. It's not to say you can't apply straight off the bat, and some people do and they get through. But if you've got evidence of working as a consultant in your own country, that does add an additional value to your application, I guess. Tasneem, should the resume be based on RSCGP format or just any resume will do? What job are you applying for, Tasneem? And while you're answering me, I'm going to see if I can find this. I got sent a resume from someone a while ago. Don't think I'm going to be able to find it, unfortunately. I should have a folder of bad resumes, but someone sent me a resume and they'd employed someone else to do it, and I was just appalled. Resident Medical Officer? Yeah, look, if the RACGP format is the one I think it is, then no, I wouldn't use it. Certainly there's an APRA format, which is, it's meant for a specific reason. Thanks, Red No, by the way. And it's meant to help with understanding where you are from a registration point of view. And it's poorly, it's unattractive in format, but the order of things is not the way that you need to be attractive to an employer. You have to understand you want to get everything that's important and sells you on the front page of your resume. And things that are important for an employer to know about an international doctor is things like your status with the AMC, things like your residency status, that sort of stuff, and what you've been doing recently in your work. And unfortunately, a lot of these templates spend the whole page talking about educational background, which is important, but it's not as important about your recent work history. Let me just see if I can find this. Yeah, so if I'll just go picture in picture here, hopefully you can see that. So this is the CV I was talking about. If your CV is in this format, then it's in the wrong format. So we've spent like a third of the page giving personal information. You can do that in a small box on the right-hand side. Then we've got tables with the qualifications. Great. We do need to know there's an AMC certificate, but again, that could be on the right-hand side. You don't need to write curriculum vitae. We know what the document is. The name should be the big bold thing so people can remember it. Bridging programs, well, they didn't do any. So you can see here, and I'm not going to go down further because I don't think I've... oh, maybe I have. So anyway, it goes down and it doesn't actually, I think it's the third page before any work history appears. So if you're asking someone to help you with your resume, by the way, just ask them what background they have, what qualifies them as an expert to write a medical resume, and ask for some samples of their work. I'm really worried that there's a lot of people out there, particularly on Facebook and even on the web, and just because you've done this process yourself, gone through it, doesn't necessarily make you the best person to guide someone else. Anyway, that's my word of caution about that. Don't hand over your money to anyone, even like me, until you've got the confidence and trust in them to demonstrate that they're going to actually be able to help you with this process. And certainly if you see something like that, as a working example, I would not get anyone to redo my resume if that's what they're coming up with. Okay. Any other questions there? So Tasneem, if you contact me, I can point you in the direction of what it should look like, by the way, and or you might want to check out one of those services I mentioned. All right. Well, it looks like we've exhausted all the questions there. Unless anyone sort of spotted any jobs there that we want me to go through, happy to do that. We might sign off and thank you guys for participating in the live stream. All right. Well, then, thank you all, and see you again shortly.